So happy to be joined by the legend, Randy Couture, former UFC champion, PFL analyst. Randy, how are you this afternoon?
Doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, but I'm not going to be hanging out at PFL. They got the Challenger Series going down this Friday. Just how satisfying is it to be a part of this? You were part of the Ultimate Fighter back in the day, to see the future of this sport and be frontline for it.
It's been amazing to be a part of the PFL, both as an analyst and now our second season for the Challenger Series. Gives me a chance to wear a little bit different hat, to kind of be a judge and judge the fighters and determine, of the winners who gets a shot at a new contract with the PFL and ultimately a crack at $1 million in the championship. So it's been really, really fun to be involved with. Watch these fighters embrace the regular season format, stepping in there every 6 or 7 weeks, fighting twice in the regular season, scoring those points to get to the playoffs and get a championship shot every single year. That's a format we can all relate to. And it's not one you normally see in prize fighting. And it's been exciting to be a part of it and promote it and see the athletes really embrace that grind.
And I mentioned it there. Does it have a similar feel to the Ultimate Fighter, other than them being locked in a house? But the opportunity that's at front here, right? I'm sure there's some similarities there.
Honestly, the only similarity it feels to me is that there's no big crowd in the audience. That was the weird thing about the Ultimate Fighter too. You're fighting in a room where there's maybe 20, 30 fans, so there's not a lot of noise, not the usual uproar that you're used to hearing in a big arena. And the same thing is true in the Challenger Series in a lot of ways. We're in a small studio. There are some fans in there, but it's not the normal circumstance and atmosphere to be fighting in. That's the only similarity I see between the Challenger Series and what was the Ultimate Fighter. Obviously, the Ultimate Fighter seemed to be way more about those guys locked in the house and the antics and the stuff that was going on in there than a lot of what was going on in the cage.
Yeah, and then the competitions that you guys had back in the day, which is just crazy to think about, the log challenge, all that stuff. So yeah, things have certainly changed since then. Obviously there's a lot of names on this upcoming card. Evelyn Martins is one that sort of stands out. What about the season as a whole? I'm Canadian. Anthony Romero is someone I'm very excited to see compete here soon. Who are some other names that sort of stand out to you in this Challenger Series?
Well, this has become, I think there was a time where there wasn't too many names in the sport I didn't know where they were training, didn't know who they were, or what their background was. And boy, did that change in a hurry. I think since '05 and the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, the landscape has changed completely. 80% of these fighters I've never heard of. I don't know where they're from. And certainly in the PFL, I mean, what do we have? 22 countries represented. I can't even pronounce half their names, let alone know where they come from and what their backgrounds are and what they're capable of. And that's been a cool thing in the Challenger Series, to get to see some of these guys compete, be successful, get the nod, get the contract. Carlos Leal and certainly Delano Taylor come to mind. There's two guys that came out of the Challenger Series last year, made it into the regular season. Carlos Leal made it all the way to the semifinals and came up a little short, but had an amazing year. Delano Taylor made it all the way to the final and came up short in the final. But to come through Challenger Series fights and then the whole regular season, the playoffs, and the finals was pretty incredible. So there's some amazing talent out there. It's been fun to call those fights and see who gets the nod, be part of that process and giving somebody the nod and a crack at $1 million.
And PFL making some big moves as well, signing Jake Paul. Just how surprised were you, or did you have sort of an inside scoop that they were, going to be coming to terms with him? What was your reaction when you found out the news?
I didn't have an inside scoop. I was kind of surprised. I know he has some aspirations in MMA. Obviously he talks that all the time. I certainly has some questions. I suspect that the PFL is going to allow him to get the technical side under his belt and get his feet wet in mixed martial arts, just like they did with Kayla Harrison, just like they're doing right now with Clarissa Shields as she transitions from boxing. I'm sure Jake is going to get the same opportunity to get a couple of selected fights, marquee, fights, to get MMA under his belt and shore up some of the technical things that he's going to need to learn to be a well-rounded mixed martial artist before they throw him in the deep end. And then at some point, they're going to have to throw him in the deep end. The rhetoric and the attention that he brings is great, but this is a meritocracy. You're going to have to walk up in that cage and fight some people and score some points if you want to get a shot at a championship. So, I mean, that's just the way that's the way it is. That's what the PFL stands for. So I hope that doesn't change just because it's Jake Paul.
Now, I don't want to be biased here, so when I ask this question, we'll exclude Extreme Couture from the conversation. But if Jake could train at any gym, what's a gym that comes to mind that would really help his skill set in transitioning into MMA? That just off the top of your head.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of great gyms out there. Certainly go to Albuquerque. That's where Clarissa has been going with Winklejohn and everything that's going on down there. They've got a great crew. Jon Jones in that house. There'll be a great school. We would open our doors and welcome Jake with open arms as well. It's about checking your ego at the door and putting yourself out there and putting yourself in some vulnerable situations and learning the things you need to learn to shore up your skill set so you can walk out there and be in that cage and be successful. That's what it's all about. So there's a plethora of schools that would open themselves up to Jake and help Jake get on this journey and figure out what he needs to know.
And another big name that's on the free agent market, someone you know quite well, Francis Ngannou. He's still out there. He's still a free agent. I saw an interview with TSN with Aaron Bronstetter, Don Davis, talking about potentially doing a heavyweight tournament and the winner would fight Francis. What do you think of that idea?
That would be interesting. I think a lot of people would pay to see that. I think Francis would be a great addition to the PFL roster in the heavyweight division. Ante Delia won for our heavyweight championship last season. He's a very, very skilled fighter. I would pay good money to watch Francis Ngannou and Ante Delia square off for sure. Now you throw a rematch with Larissa Pacheco and Kayla Harrison on that card. You throw Jake Paul on that card, sign one of the Diaz brothers, and you're off and running. That's a heck of a pay-per-view right there.
Do you think it gives PFL a bit of a leg up? Ray Cefo's at your gym. You're obviously, own Extreme Couture. Ngannou trains there. Do you think that helps your case if he does want to come and join PFL just because, again, there's a lot of familiarity there?
Well, I think if what just went down with the UFC and Francis is any indication, Francis is going to do what's best for Francis.
Yeah.
Francis is going to go where he believes he has the best opportunity to succeed and flourish in this career of his. So I will not begrudge him 1 second if he ends up in the boxing world. There's been some scuttlebutt and talk about that. I know that PFL is on his radar as well. That would be a great place for him as well. I want Francis to do what Francis wants to do, what he believes in his heart is best for him. We can all talk about it out here, but what's most important is what's in Francis's heart.
And you did a similar move in your career, wanting to fight Fedor Emelianenko, years ago. And, here's Francis, having all these things that I think a lot of fighters want to see, health insurance, all this stuff. I know you know Francis quite well, but did you see part of yourself in Francis in negotiating with the UFC? Because you did something similar, being like, hey, I want to fight Fedor.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there between my fight with both SCG, the original owners of the UFC, and Zuffa when they bought the company. I had contract issues with both those entities, questioned them over ancillary rights and a lot of other things. Fighter pay was certainly an issue as well. I didn't speak with Francis specifically about those things, but I certainly recognize the similarities by him standing up and raising some questions about what was going on and trying to garner some things that he felt like he wanted, not only for the sport, but for himself, for his own career. I was in that exact same boat. So I definitely recognize the similarities there. And I never really talked to Francis directly. I did talk to Eric, who's our gym manager and one of Francis' main coaches. So him and I talked about the similarities. Him and I talked about how I felt about it. And I basically just said, hey, he needs to do what he thinks is best for him. At the end of the day, this is his career, and he needs to do what he thinks is best for his career and his family.
Yes, and the fight that I just referenced there, Fedor Emelianenko, he's actually fighting this weekend, which is just crazy to think that he's still competing at a high level. He's fighting Ryan Bader on the weekend. Is that a fight you still wish that kind of got away, that one that you kind of think about like, man, I wish that fight happened? Because I remember the stare down, Randy. It was very, very awesome.
Yeah, well, that was an affliction photo shoot we did that intentionally. I was pursuing that fight. Mark Cuban was involved in trying to help us make that fight happen. Obviously, the UFC wasn't going to let that happen outside of the UFC, and they couldn't come to terms with Fedor. They offered him great money, but there were a lot of other stipulations that M1, who controls Fedor's contract, wanted that the UFC wasn't willing to do, and that obviously created a rift between me and Dana and the UFC back then as well. I'm going to be at the Bellator fights on Saturday to pay tribute and homage to Fedor's career. Dan Henderson, Mark Coleman, a bunch of the guys that actually fought Fedor are going to be there as well. It's going to be pretty cool to see his retirement fight. And, I mean, there's one of the best that ever did it right there. And I respect him, always respected him. At that time, he was ranked number 1 in the world. Most of the rankings had me at number 2 in the world. So that's why I wanted that fight. You want to fight the best and be considered the best. So it never happened. It's one of those things you just have to let go of at some point. It's just no way. I'm 59, going on 60 years old. There's no way in heck it's happening now. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Looking good though at your age, Randy, I got to say. One of your old divisions, you've competed in multiple divisions. The light heavyweight division has a new champion, Jamahal Hill. I don't know if you caught the performance. What did you think of his win over a very aging fighter who's still getting it done in Glover Teixeira?
Well, I am a big Glover fan. Obviously, John Hackelman's a great guy and a great trainer, and obviously he's the one that trained Chuck for years. And I had 3 fights with Chuck, and I know Chuck very, very well. We're friends as well. I really respect Glover and what he's done. He's a great athlete and a great representative of our sport as a human, as a person. So hats off to him for everything he accomplished, for winning the championship at his age. Obviously, I know what that feels like. I know the dedication and the attention to detail that requires at that age. It's you can't do it the way you did when you were younger. So he's just a great guy. I didn't get to watch the fight. I was busy, but I heard all about it. I saw some of the highlights about it, and I was very, very pleased for Glover and everything that he'd accomplished.
And of course, the former champ in that division, Jon Jones, moving up to heavyweight, pulling a Randy Couture. What do you think of that move with Jon taking 3 years off, and we'll be seeing him at heavyweight?
Well, there's a question there. Ring rust, is that going to be a factor? And then, fighting the bigger guys is a different animal. You got to approach these bigger guys differently. You can't just go out there and do the things you normally do with guys your own size, especially the bigger athletes. And now they're not just big, they're athletic and big. So I think Jon is a smart guy. He's going to do what he needs to do and make the adjustments he needs to. He's certainly a formidable technical opponent for anybody. He's going to have to probably rely a little more on his wrestling than he has at 205. You got to tie these big guys up. You got to make them work. You got to make them, take them out of that comfort zone. You just can't go toe to toe with a great big guy. Obviously I have a couple of examples of that, but I think he's going to make that transition just fine. Obviously I think we're all wishing him the best. And then we all have a little trepidation that there's going to be more antics and BS that happens outside the cage that kind of derails him again. And we hope that doesn't happen, because it's not only just bad for Jon Jones, it's bad for our sport.
Do you think he beats Ciryl Gane on March 4th?
I think he has a great shot at beating Ciryl Gane, but there are some questions there, both tactical and technical questions, moving up and facing a big guy. I think he has everything he needs to do it, but can he pull it off? There's the question.
And we have the big title fight next Saturday, Islam Makhachev, Alex Volkanovski moving up from 145. Do you think Volk can do it, or do you think Islam, after that performance against Charles Oliveira, will defeat him?
Again, solid matchup, and anytime you can toss a coin and make a case for either guy to technically win that fight, that's what makes this sport so exciting, is that it is so competitive. I can make a case for either one of those guys to win that fight. I think, again, it's going to be tough to call. It's just the way the sport is now. You used to be able to make a lot of predictions, and I think for a while in the old days when I was commentating, I was somewhere in the 90th percentile in calling them right. I'm not near that close anymore. There's just so many fighters that we don't know. That's one of the things that's been so fun about the PFL. 22 countries represented last season. I don't know how many countries we're going to have this season. I know we've already got a gal from Mongolia from judo coming into the Challengers Series coming up tomorrow. So it's just the nature of our sport. It's the fastest growing sport in the world right now. So tough to make predictions.
I mentioned the Ultimate Fighter. Unfortunate news about someone I know you were very close with, Stephan Bonnar. Just your favorite memory of Stephan, any sort of story that comes to mind. Just absolutely tragic what happened at the end of last year.
Yeah, it was a horrible situation. That whole week, honestly, was a pretty rough situation for our sport. With what happened with Baroni, Bonnar, losing Rumble Johnson to cancer, and then the slap heard around the world. It was a pretty rough week in our sport. Stephan was an amazing guy and gregarious personality, Arguably the most important fight, certainly for that decade, that fight between him and Forrest Griffin. He was on my team in that season.
Team Green, I remember, Randy. It was still my favorite
season.
He
moved to Vegas and trained with us for a huge part of his career after that show. But so did Forrest. And having both those guys in the room, they were great technical workhorses that were great partners for me, for sure. I was still competing, and they were great partners, both of them, for me. Stephan was a great kid. He's going to be sorely missed. It's tough to speculate, obviously, and I don't want to speculate about any of it because he is an amazing family, and I don't really know the root of everything that was going on down there, but he certainly had a monkey on his back. I think we saw some videos and some things that were very concerning, and then to have it all go down and go out that way, it was just a real shame.
And just last question, you mentioned the slap herd around the world. How about the slap league, power slap league? What is your thoughts on this? Is this something safe, or what do you think about the whole power slap league thing?
Man, I got to watch a slap fight competition that Logan Paul was promoting at the Arnold Classic last year. And it is like watching a train wreck. You cannot watch it. You have to watch. Of those 5 fights that I watched that day, 3 of the 5 were knockouts. We're talking about the significance of CTE and head trauma in football, and certainly in our sport of mixed martial arts. What are we doing here? Stand at a table belly to belly and slap each other to see who goes down first? It is pretty sensational, and I think that's why it's attracting everybody's attention in our society, and that's probably a statement about the state of our society right now. I think there's some potential there for some pretty significant brain damage, honestly. A lot of these fights end up in knockouts, and that's got to be concerning. As a competitor, as somebody, all those guys and gals have loved ones that care about them, and obviously they want them to pursue their passion, and this is something they must be passionate about. I know that from fighting, because fighting is a tough way to make a living too. Going out and getting punched in the face. I joke about it all the time, but it's the truth. It's a tough way to make a living. So, yeah, there's a sensational part of that I think is what's driving this popularity, but there is also some underlying medical concerns with just smacking the hell out of each other and seeing who goes down first.
It's PFL Challengers Series Week 2 coming up here this Friday on Fubo TV. Randy, thank you so much for doing this, and enjoy the show. We're looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it as well. I travel tomorrow to Orlando. I will be there. So all of you, this is the opportunity. You have a voice. You can vote and help me decide who gets that contract.